We're live.
I just got the notice that you're live. Yay.
I did it.
We're live on Facebook, so how's it going, guys?
Thank you. So should we go ahead and get started?
Waiting for a few more people. We're at 18 right now. So
All right.
one more minute.
Yeah, a couple more minutes.
Yeah, we just need to make sure the speakers are on as well.
Do you, Gabe, you sounding a little bit far back to me. Like, I don't know if your microphone can be turned up or.
Let's see, does that sound better? Or should I just try to project more?
Stephanie, what do you think?
A little more.
Try to project more, because I don't think it's anything wrong with your speaker. Maybe it's just my speakers here at this end. They seem to be fine.
Okay, thank you. Well, welcome everybody joining us on this live feed. We're getting ready to get started here shortly. All right. Hi, Rodney.
How you doing, Gabe?
I'm doing good.
You're looking sharp, as usual.
Well, you know, I dressed up for this special event.
Probably a good reason to do so.
Yeah. All right, well, it is now 11:30 and we have a packed agenda and exciting program. So bienvenidos a todos. Welcome. My name is Gabriel Castro and I serve as the chair for the Hispano Philanthropic Society. Thank you all for attending our event today. We are super honored for your continued support. We hope you find our program today engaging, informative. And I want to start off by thanking our generous sponsors, Sandia National Laboratories and the HPS Leadership Giving Circle. We have an incredible opportunity today to come together once again and enjoy a discussion around the dedicated service of our state leaders in championing, moving the needle in the area of education for our state. We will have the opportunity to listen in and interact on the discussion of issues related to the 2021 legislative session, New Mexico's education system, and the impact on Hispanic families. Now, before we get started, we want you to note that we are recording this meeting, and we are also live streaming this event on Facebook. Attendees have all been muted, and we are asking all but our speakers and panelists to turn off your videos, as these will be broadcast through the Facebook streaming. So if you choose to turn off your video, please do so now. There will be a question and answer session, and we would love to interact with all of our attendees. So please use the chat function in this meeting to add your questions in for our moderator. Our keynote address today will be delivered by our state governor, Michelle Lujan-Grisham, and our panel includes state leaders, Dr. Ryan Stewart, Secretary of Education, Senator Michael Padilla, and Representative Kelly Fajardo. So who is HPS? Well, the Hispano Philanthropic Society was founded in 2010 by a group of 4 community leaders as a donor group of United Way of Central New Mexico, created with the idea of an organization where Hispanics could actively engage with our community and practice philanthropy. We are forever thankful to LaDonna Hopkins, Ed Rivera, Alex Romero, and Juan Avila, our founding members, a membership that today has grown to nearly 400. Since its inception, your donations have helped fund nonprofit agencies whose support in the area that has come to be known as Mission Graduate. Because of your continued support, we are growing and exploring how to make a larger impact in our community. Next, I'd like to introduce Rodney Prunty, President and CEO of United Way of Central New Mexico, to give a brief update on the work of United Way. Rodney?
Thanks, Gabe. So in order to help create a more equitable and just community, United Way developed a new initiative for our staff to learn about and model diversity, equity, and inclusion. In 2020, we partnered with the Albuquerque Community Foundation and hired Soulfire Consulting Group to provide training on anti-racism. Our organizations completed an internal assessment of our own practices and are now participating in a 3-part training series called Recognizing, Interrupting, and Disrupting Inequity in New Mexico. Similarly, DEI will be an important component of the future work of HPS. In fact, they've created a new mission statement that I'm happy to share. The Hispano Philanthropic Society promotes Hispanic leadership in philanthropy through recognition, engagement, and development of Hispanic talent to advance cultural prosperity in our community. It's now my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Governor Michelle Lujan-Grisham. Michelle Lujan-Grisham is the 32nd governor of the state of New Mexico and the first Democratic Latina to be elected governor in U.S. history. As governor, Lujan-Grisham has implemented a series of evidence-based policies aimed at transforming New Mexico's public education system, expanding the state's economy to include more high-quality employment opportunities, and preserving New Mexico's air, land, and water. In 2021, a significant emphasis was made on continuing investments in the governor's Moonshot for Education, including the passing of HJR 1, which will provide additional funding for early childhood and K-12, as well as additional higher education investments in the Opportunity and Lottery scholarships. There were also important bills aimed at expanding broadband, as well as big investments in our state's economic recovery and support of New Mexico business as we focus on pandemic recovery efforts. And as of May 5th, 30 New Mexico counties were at the turquoise level, in which there are the fewest restrictions on commercial and day-to-day activities amid decreased virus risk. The majority of the state's counties remain at the least restrictive levels, and we thank the governor for her tireless dedication during these difficult times. Please join me in welcoming Governor Michelle Lujan-Grisham.
Good morning, everyone. And Rodney, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And Gabe, I appreciate your leadership with United Way in creating and reminding us about the Hispanic Philanthropic Society and recognizing that the best efforts will be because we have a robust private-public set of partnerships in the state. And that really also means that the giving and nonprofit community has to be not only at the table in supporting us with their investments, priorities, and strategies, but it's that collective work that will get us evidence-based, both investments and practices that won't just move the needle, which we are dedicated to doing. And we want to share good news. And we've got distinguished panelists that will talk to you about any number of their own efforts and policymaking strategies that are indeed moving the needle. But what every education system in this country, every public education system, frankly, needs, and we saw that through the pandemic, is they need transformative efforts. That means resources, evidence-based strategies and ideas, the inclusion of parents and families and educators and policymakers, federal government, state government, local government, tribal government, we all have to come together and make sure that our comprehensive work is transforming the way that we both think about education and the ways in which we support our students and their families. And so I'm delighted to be here because, in fact, New Mexico, certainly in my opinion, is leading the nation in a comprehensive effort. And that is demonstrated by the continuation of what we're calling moonshot investments and policy strategies that are coming right out of the New Mexico legislature. And I want to thank our legislative panelists today, both Representative Fajardo and Senator Michael Padilla, who have been leaders in a number of education areas, and certainly making sure that what we focus on is a cradle to career effort, so that we aren't leaving any student, any family member behind. We're clear about the segue and impact on a future workforce and our future investments in economic diversity. And then we're also clear that the earlier we start, the better all of our outcomes will be. So a big shout out, this legislative session, we have added another $413 million into New Mexico's public education system. That is incredible, and taken collectively between 2019 and the 2021 legislative session, New Mexico is continuing to certainly lead per capita investments in transforming our entire education system. So I want to highlight in this legislative session what I think are going to be some of the most remarkable transformative efforts. So let's start with one, and that is, and you mentioned it, our land grant permanent fund House Joint Resolution, which will go before the voters, asking voters to allow us to take a full additional percentage out of the land grant permanent fund and apply it towards early childhood education and some K-12 initiatives, allowing us to secure for New Mexico educators, our education system, and families that we're going to make sure that every 3- and 4-year-old has the opportunity for early childhood education. And we're going to be bridging, right? Some 5-year-olds are eligible based on their birthdays to go to kindergarten, and some aren't, making sure that we're also fully invested in making sure that those kiddos are in an early education environment. We now see the federal government leaning in, wanting to make for the United States universal early childhood education, recognizing that the debate is long over, that the earlier we provide evidence-based educational age-appropriate strategies, the healthier our families are, the better prepared our students are, and the better the outcomes in K-5, which we know in New Mexico has been a source of concern about whether or not our kiddos are getting what they need in the classroom K-5 so that they're ready to succeed in mid-school and high school, so that we can lower truancy, dropout rates, and increase, right, education opportunities that lead to workforce opportunities and college and university opportunities right out of high school. This is a game changer. As many of you know, prior to this legislative session, we also created the Early Childhood Education and Care Department, the first of its kind in the country. I believe more will be coming around the country, and they're going to really look to New Mexico's leadership for those investments, also recognizing that you can't really move or transform a system if you don't consider the issues of families who are engaging in our education system, which is why all the early interventions for families with children will be occurring in the context of making sure that we have a robust access to a universal early childhood educational care department system. So I'm very excited about that. And I have no doubt that given that New Mexico voters, certainly in 2018, made education their #1 focus, my sense is that voters in New Mexico will embrace this question to them about whether or not we want to see more of our money in our constitutionally protected endowment that was set up specifically for public education. So I think that this is a monumental achievement, and I might add for both the Senate and the House, it's decades in the making, and I'm very proud of the New Mexico legislature for making it a reality. You also know that we're making, again, investments in K through 5+ and extended learning. We know that the evidence is also clear that the longer we're in the classroom, particularly in the earliest educational environments, the better prepared our students and their families are to succeed. We've got robust investments to make sure that we do that. The legislature provided even more flexibility tools so that we're allowing each school district to engage in determining and directing how those programs can best meet the students and families in a particular school district and a particular community. I'm very excited and proud to announce that we've got a record 28,000 requests for engaging in either extended learning or K-5+. That tells me that all of those students engaged in those requests are going to be better prepared, and what we will learn from what school districts and families need in engaging in extended learning will allow us to continue to build best practices in that design. The legislature also, as part of that $413 million, made sure that New Mexico's got more investments in community schools. Now, community schools is a pretty broad platform to describe a relationship between both families, educators, school districts, school policymakers, and the business community, including the philanthropic community in a school area or school district. Recognizing that it's the #1 priority for most of those entities, recognizing also that we can't diversify the economy, provide full opportunities, make sure that we're inclusive, make sure that we're breaking barriers of discrimination, and really robustly making sure that New Mexico can lead the nation in economic opportunity and diversity. Well, to do that, we know that a community school design means that those investments, the volunteerism, the engagement, the support to families and businesses in those communities, including healthcare and behavioral health, is enhanced in a community school effort. I'm proud to say that we are expanding the number of schools every year who are interested in both grant and support from the public education department and their community to be identified and use resources to build those partnerships and to create an environment where we're all engaged in making sure that the needs are met in any particular school, classroom, or school district. What else can we do in that regard? Well, we have a first of its kind, I think, groundbreaking new piece of legislation that's going to get at the most at-risk families in our state, right? Everything we know tells us that the higher the poverty rate, the more at risk a family is for succeeding in any environment, but particularly these families and children in our educational system. So the Family Income Index is a mechanism to pull together more than just the poverty information for schools in a Title I environment using federal data to identify schools that have poor students and looking at those socioeconomic issues to identify that. But here we're going to use census data, Human Services Department data, Medicaid data, a variety of factors that allow us to identify even more discreetly which families are most at risk and most in need, and provide additional financial support to those schools, with the intention being that those schools then have the flexibility to get that money, if you will, not just into the classroom, but into the living room for families who need it most. So think about nutrition and food security, think about transportation, think about housing security, think about the risk factors that we know make or break a student's ability. And what else do we know about these households and families in New Mexico? They are largely minority families, with those with the most risk being in our Hispanic families and Hispanic communities. I certainly don't want this group to determine that we aren't aware that many of our Title I schools have families who present as African American, Asian American, and certainly our tribal communities are going to fall well within these extreme poverty identifiers. I want to also tell you that this is a legislature that made specific and direct investments into all of those groups, making sure that racial equity was at the forefront of every single strategy investment, from specific educational funding into tribal remedies, resolving after 50 years impact aid, making sure that those dollars are going into school districts with large concentrated tribal community students or tribal students in their school districts. And also making sure that we've got educational investments directed towards better achievements and outcomes and more focus, particularly for African-American students and their families. Really making sure that resources are doing what they should always do, really focused on the students where they are and making sure that we're giving the students, the classroom, that means their educators, and their families every single tool and opportunity to succeed. But we're not ending with K through 12 and certainly early childhood education. We are making sure that we are focused on careers right outside of our K through 12. So you can also see that the federal government is taking a page out of New Mexico's playbook, making sure that they're launching in their both infrastructure requests to Congress, and they're lining up more opportunities to make sure that in the United States, two-year college is universal or free to all students. Now, New Mexico, through its opportunity scholarships, investments in the lottery scholarship, we are leaning in to make sure, including, I want to go to financial aid, we're leaning in to make sure, again, no wrong door, every subset of investment is available, not just for 2-year, but for 4 years. So we're looking at career technical training, associate degrees, and we're looking at bachelor degrees. And I have no doubt that the legislature is going to get productive requests from our institutions of higher education and our department to really look forward to even investments in graduate degree programs, making it clear that if we really want a completely transformative cradle to career education system, we've got to think of public education in the context of meeting every single one of those components. What do we also know about higher education? That nearly 50% of our higher education students are Hispanic. We also know that 40% of our higher education students are 25 years in age and older. We also know that we've got a considerable number of higher education students that are going to school part-time. What do we know about those data sets? Well, what we know is that college is still too expensive and out of reach, particularly for young families starting out who are required to work and navigate an education system that feels still out of reach for far too many of these young families. The goal here is to make sure that using either opportunity scholarships, and we're not quite fully funded, but I really want to thank the legislature for leaning in. 18 million is getting us closer and closer, 15 million for the lottery scholarships, making sure that we're leveraging and drawing down every federal dollar for education means that you can support student families, tuition, fees, books, housing, living expenses, all of the things that support a family to actually stay in school. And we know that students in higher education that have their needs met in higher education are far more likely to graduate. A full 22% increase in graduation rates if in fact you make these investments. The legislature also provided resources to the higher education department to invest in more behavioral health and to invest in more food security programs for students attending higher education. Again, what is the takeaway from our efforts? That if we don't have a comprehensive wraparound structure for education, we create far too many gaps for students and their families to fall through. And what we know here in New Mexico is indeed they will. And the cost to us and to society and the inequity in allowing them to fall through those gaps without finding every single tool to make sure that they succeed means that we don't move forward or succeed as a state. I'm incredibly excited about our ability to draw down federal dollars and about our ability to robustly, comprehensively meet the needs of New Mexico higher education students for the first time ever. And frankly, it's proud heritage in New Mexico. New Mexico's got a long history, 25 years, about being the first state to recognize that if you want a comprehensive public education system for students, you must include higher education in that design. It's another leadership factor about this state that we should all be incredibly proud of. Two more things. We know that if we're going to meet our diversity and we're going to really do more about multicultural, multilinguistic opportunities, then we've got to do a better job investing in those strategies for our future educators. So the investments in Grow Your Own Teacher, our investments in loan forgiveness, our investments in language appropriate training, skills and supports in higher education, our investments in tribal colleges are all aimed, and again, no wrong door, professional development, go back to school, loan forgiveness, do it on the front end, including more robust resources for students who determine that they want a career in either early childhood education, K through 12 or higher educational environments. Again, really focused on the transformative nature of making a decision that New Mexico can and deserves a moonshot set of investments and strategies in education. And I'm incredibly proud of those efforts. And we know, and in fact, we have seen a dramatic decrease in teacher vacancies in our administration year to year, year to year. Why is that? Because the tools and resources to support educators in the classroom, including compensation and professional development, bringing respect and dignity and solving the problems that they were seeing in their classroom, makes the difference in recruiting talented New Mexicans into the fields where we need them most, encouraging future generation of educators statewide. What's another vehicle that New Mexico needs desperately and is a game changer in education that we saw in very negative ways create significant challenges to New Mexico businesses, educators, and New Mexico students was the lack of access to the internet. I want to do a specific shout out to Senator Padilla, who has been working again for his entire public career on making sure that New Mexico does everything in its power to make sure that broadband and connectivity is inside, right, the household, the classroom, and available to every student, no matter where they live, who they are in the state. Our Office of Broadband is an incredible investment in creating a state structure that will allow us, including having Connect New Mexico funds and a funding opportunity and a broadband council that, again, allows us to probably bring in about $1 billion in federal resources. I can see Senator Padilla doing a happy seated dance. I feel the same way. In addition to leveraging, right, the 400+ million in public education already for connectivity and broadband, and 200 million almost in state legislative funding just this last legislative session. And while many of us, myself included, might step back a bit and say, that is an incredible, right, set of resources. Do we really need that much? Yes, we do. If we're going to make it accessible, available, high speed, and in every corner of the state. And we now have the judicial community making it clear to the state that it is in fact our responsibility to make sure that every student has access to high-speed internet. And we're going to embrace that challenge and mandate. It's hard, but this is a state that's going to harness the power, the resources, and the ability by bringing every expert to the table, making sure that office in the office of the governor gets the highest level of attention and set of priorities to make sure that with our policymakers and our businesses, that we really think about ways to meet the internet access needs of everyone. And I might point out that we've got an exciting company called Sky that would allow us to bring internet using both microwave and satellite technology without having to lay fiber, so that we might be able, for example, to have quick, affordable internet access all throughout the Navajo Nation. Now that's being tested as we speak right now. And we are also working, I want to let this group know, not certainly to the exclusion of anyone else, but recognizing that many of our challenges are going to be with our sovereign nations, that we are specifically working in a three-way partnership, utilizing the Navajo Nation as a focal point to work with the Commerce Department, the White House, Congress, and the state of New Mexico to make sure that our connectivity issues and needs get done as quickly as we can. Now, I only highlighted some of the top line sets of investments. I told you that our outcomes are changing in the positive. I don't want anyone in the panel or anyone in this group to believe that anyone in this administration, myself included, thinks we're done. And while we did move in a positive direction in child well-being, and we are working with groups who are incredible powerhouses like you and Voices for Children. We're making a dent in food insecurity, that our graduation rates are up by any number of measures, that the confidence in our public education system up, that our teacher vacancies down. There is so much more we must do. And to do that effectively, the work that you are engaged in today, by talking about and making New Mexico's public education system as broad as possible, recognizing that lifting our families out of poverty today and forever, it creates the economic futures and opportunities later, create a whole new situation for a state that has struggled in many of these outcomes and has failed to eliminate extreme poverty. And the way forward is through our investments and our work collectively in our public education system. So I am delighted that that's your focus. I look forward to the panel answering and engaging with your questions, dialogues, and comments. And we take on every single challenge before us to make sure that New Mexico students get every opportunity to succeed, to have success, and to have the kind of positive experiences in their education system that will hold them up for a lifetime, including be available when they determine to have their families engaged in public education right here in the great state of New Mexico. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you for honoring me with allowing me to be the keynote speaker. And if we were going to go through every education policy that's productive, that's been passed by this legislature, that's a 12-week program, because that's been the focus of every single legislative session, and it's been a remarkable effort. And I am very proud of our policymakers in the state and delighted to have continuing opportunities to work with them. Thanks very much.
Governor Lujan-Grisham, as representing HPS, the United Way of Central New Mexico, and all of our viewers right now, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your inspiring leadership and championing what you called, and rightfully so, transformative work that needs to be done in the area of education, highlighting cradle to career, and for breaking down the work that's being done, as well as what we can continue to rally and champion in our community. And as a healthcare worker, thank you for helping lead New Mexico to be a leader in the COVID-19 response, as well as in our vaccination response.
Well, Gabe, you're welcome. And I know that I'm over my time and you're trying to get me to sign off so that you can get to the other critical work. But, you know, New Mexico has less of everything when it certainly comes to fighting COVID or any deadly virus in the context of a global once-in-a-century pandemic. Our healthcare providers are heroes in this state. Our families and educators all stepped up. And I am too incredibly proud of where we are and where we'll go. And it's a great plug for me to continue to ask New Mexicans, if you haven't been vaccinated, get your vaccine. We've made it incredibly easy. We'll come to you and your business. We're going to come to schools for students whose parents want them vaccinated at school, for any other educators who are recently graduated or going to be coming in to school this school year. So we're going to be available to you in any context of ways, and businesses can do pop-up clinics. And it basically is a click on the internet or a phone call, and we will make it happen for you. So thank you for your kind words, and thank you everyone today for your leadership in keeping New Mexico safe.
Thank you. The next part of our program will include audience participation. So remember to place your questions in the chat if you wish to interact with the panelists. I'm now going to pass our program over to Amanda Aragon, who will serve as our panel moderator. Amanda serves as the Executive Director of NewMexicoKidsCAN. NewMexicoKidsCAN was founded in 2018 and serves as a catalyst and conduit to advocate for community-informed, student-centered, and research-backed education policies. And she also serves on our HPS Council. Amanda Aragon.
Thank you so much, Gabe. And I think the governor has departed, but just of course want to pass on our thank you for her to take the time to really set the stage for this conversation today. So I am so honored and excited to be joined by some of the most influential educational leaders in our state, including Secretary Ryan Stewart, Michael Padilla, and Kelly Fajardo. So right, we are excited about an idea that you may have that her comments sparked, but I will let you all weigh in on your reactions and then we'll get started with some questions.
I thought that can you hear me? Oh, go ahead, Mr. Secretary.
I was just saying I had a hard time hearing the prompt and was just wondering if you wouldn't mind repeating it really quickly.
I'm so sorry. Can you hear me okay now? Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to hear any reactions that you have from the governor's remarks.
Thank you. Good.
Yeah, I felt like the governor encapsulated the tremendous amount of work that was done during the session with regard to public education. I have to say that, and I don't know how Representative Fajardo feels or Secretary Stewart, but I felt like every time I turned around, we were making a really significant, tough decision.
I think I've lost the senator.
Okay, I have as well. So Representative Fajardo, do you want to jump in and we'll see if we can get Senator Padilla back online?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for having me. Just so you guys know, we have a small family business, and I am at the office today, and I have a little granddaughter running around me. So if you see a face pop up, that's that. So she wants to be a part of this, and so just kind of let you know. And of course, it's actually great because she's, you know, my son has been firsthand in dealing with, you know, a lot of the issues that we've been facing during this pandemic. She's in preschool, and he comes to the office every single day, and he tries to sit in front of a video screen and tries to teach her. And I watch it, and you know, I really, somebody said speak louder. I do have a bad microphone, and I apologize for that. And so we've seen kind of firsthand kind of some of the things that's been happening during the pandemic and some of the concerns. You know, I do want to send a congratulations to Senator Padilla, and I know we lost him for a second. But, you know, he's done a lot of work on broadband in our state. And we've done study after study on what that looks like and what that means. And I want to congratulate him on the years of work that he has put into improving that broadband infrastructure around our state. Because as we move forward, those are the things that we're going to need to do. We're never going to come out of this. We're entering a different world in how we educate our children. And so we need those options moving forward. And so I just want to congratulate the senator for that.
Thank you, Representative. I know that one of the things that the governor highlighted are the federal funds that are coming to our schools. And so maybe Secretary Stewart, I'll kick this one to you and then ask Representative Fajardo and Senator Padilla if we get him back online to weigh in as well. But it's $1 billion of funding for our public schools here in the state of New Mexico. And I know I heard Governor Lujan-Grisham mention our Title I schools, but just to put that in perspective, this amount of funding is double the annual amount of funding our Title I schools get. So this is a tremendous amount of funding coming to our K through 12 public schools in the state of New Mexico. And I would love to hear from each of you, starting with Secretary Stewart, how we might be prioritizing those funds and what initiatives we may be looking to implement with those funds.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks to the other panelists and for having this opportunity to be able to talk through some of the exciting things that we've got going here in the state. No doubt that this has been perhaps the most difficult year that we have ever faced in education. And despite that, despite the potential that the pandemic could have had to reduce the amount of resources that we have or stop us in our tracks and the investments that we've made, I'm very excited to be part of an administration and thank the legislature for continuing to invest in education and not moving backward. And not every state gets to say that. I know when I get to talk to many of my counterparts who have the same role in other states, they're looking at a very different situation as opposed to touting 26.5% increase in investments since the administration took over. Many of them are looking at how they're plugging holes and filling gaps. And we've just taken a very different tack on how we view education and the importance that we're placing on it. And that's really going to matter a great deal as we continue to go forward. So in addition to the incredible things that the governor mentioned, the investments that we've made, the new acts that we've passed, and the funding changes that we've made, Amanda, to your point, we're seeing a once in a generation influx of new funding, which I want to both be incredibly excited about the opportunity that we have here and also put it into some context. So first, let me start with the context. We have $1 billion more. And when you take the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Relief and Response Supplemental Appropriation Act, and the American Rescue Plan Act all together, it's even more, approaching $1.5 billion that we get to use over the next 3 years. And we have a lot of flexibility in how they get used to support our students, which is great. To give that a little bit of context, though, when we think about the amount of money that goes out through the SEG over those multiple years, you're looking at about 18 to 19% increase overall over what would normally flow through the SEG. That's significant and it's substantial, but again, 18 to 19% is not the just kind of massive piece of the pie that when you hear that $1.5 billion price tag that you might jump to. So we do have about a 3-year use period for those funds. And 90% of those funds go directly out to the school districts for their use. Now, at the Public Education Department, we've set some priorities on where we want to see that money go. Most importantly, closing the digital divide, making sure that we have safe learning environments, including air quality, sanitization, and other measures, PPE that our staff need. Making sure that we're attending to the social and emotional needs that our students are going to come back with from the pandemic. We know that needs for counseling, needs for extra support services are going to be critical. And then making up for the academic impacts of the pandemic and providing those additional supports and interventions and doing the work to make sure that we're understanding where our students are and how we support them. So we've set some priorities, but ultimately 90% of it goes out to the districts and to the charter schools for local determinations as to how that gets spent. At the state level, we're prioritizing a few things which we know are going to make a critical statewide difference for us to come back strong from the pandemic. One of them is investing in the academic infrastructure to support students as they return. We're going to be, with our state level funds, bringing in more tutors, bringing in more educational assistants, trying to make sure that we're able to retain our educational assistants and train them to become future teachers in the classroom and provide additional supports for kids. We've also invested in a statewide learning management system, which we'll have in place over the coming years to make sure that we're able to expand the coursework that we house in that system and be able to make it available across the state, as well as building up a more robust online infrastructure, because this is the time where we get to take advantage of the fact that we've built up new skills, we've invested in new technologies, and more so than ever before, students who need a course or who need support or who need to be able to access an online programming anywhere in the state will have the ability to do so, and we're building up that statewide infrastructure to do that work, as well as continuing to invest in our ability to make sure that staff are safe and well cared for when they come back into the building, and that we have the right indoor air quality and PPE procurement distribution systems to support them. So those are just a few critical areas around the federal funds, but we have an incredible opportunity here, and we're doubling down to make sure that we build on those investments.
Thank you, Secretary Stewart. Representative Fajardo or Senator Padilla, I recognize that there's some interesting dynamics with all of the federal funds coming to the state. And I think one of the situations that we have in New Mexico, since you guys run shorter legislative sessions, is we see many other states, the legislature being a little bit more active in these conversations about the federal funds coming to schools because they're still in session. But since you all are out of session, are there any ways that you as legislators want to see these federal funds utilized? As Secretary Stewart said, 90% of that $1 billion is going to flow directly to our local school districts. So whether those are the districts in your Senate and House districts or just statewide education districts, are there any priorities that you'd like to see highlighted over the next couple of years?
Well, if it's all right with the representative, can you hear me, Amanda?
Yes.
Okay. I thought I'd give you a live demonstration of why broadband is so critical here in New Mexico. So I was kicked off and tried to get back in. Of course, the computer decided to update itself. You know how it's going these days. But I'm so glad that we're all able to get together this way. I thought the governor hit some of the critical elements, and it was a really active, involved session. But with regard to the dollars and how they're going to flow, you heard 90% going to the districts. I'm hoping that 98% of the 90% reaches the actual classroom, because we already have we had a very successful legislative session with regard to public education. I'm imploring, I'm pleading with, and I serve on the Legislative Education Study Committee. The governor talked about early
I think we lost Senator Padilla again. So Representative Fajardo, would you mind jumping in? I will text Senator Padilla and ask him to call in. Maybe the service on his cell phone is a little bit better than the internet.
So Senator Padilla has broadband issues, and I have grandchildren around me right now. So this is the life of a legislator, just so you guys know. So I'm actually excited about the money coming into the classroom. I know for me, and one of the issues that I deal with in my own community, because I do have one of the school districts that is dealing with. So I guess the best way for me to explain this, a few years back, we had one of the schools in my district, and Apple came in and brought an all kind of technology, and every kid got an iPad. The problem is these children were not allowed to take those iPads home, because in this particular school district, if you take those iPads home, uncle is going to steal that iPad and sell it for drugs. So so I think that's a conversation that I don't think we've had yet as New Mexicans, because we do have a lot of kids here who have been checked out. I think Senator Stewart, he's fully aware. I think we're down to 6,000 kids that are missing. There was 12,000 at one time. We still have 6,000 kids that are unaccounted for. So we have kids that have not been educated for an entire year. I have one teacher who is dealing with all the emotional issues of these children going back. Well, all of a sudden, when you're in this virtual world, you have this bullying that happens, and now these young kids are now in a classroom face to face with a bully that they never had to deal with. So, Secretary Stewart touched on it about these the social emotional needs, and those are big going after this pandemic. We have kids who have not been educated. We have kids who are going to need this emotional support because they've been in a virtual world for an entire year. I thank God for the tutoring that Secretary Stewart mentioned. That has to be priority number one. You have to have behavioral health in these classrooms. Otherwise, you have a certain segment, and these are going to be the lower income students that are missing an entire year. That if we do not come after them aggressively, if we do not give them an educational foundation, if we do not give them emotional support that they need, they are going to be outpaced by the kids that, where their parents have been able to afford a tutor during the pandemic. I think we're entering one of the biggest educational gaps in U.S. history, and I hope that New Mexico is on the cutting edge of overcoming that and not the staple of being last in everything. So I'm excited about the money coming in, but I think it does need to be prioritized so that these kids get the support that they desperately need.
Thank you, Representative. And just to flag for the panel, I'll give you a preview of the next question. It will revolve around something that Representative Fajardo just highlighted, which is these gaps in student learning that we've seen historically. Let's be honest, they were here before the pandemic, and they'll be here after. So my next question will be related to that, but I will turn to Senator Padilla, who is back with us and has the best perseverance of anyone on these Zoom calls. But Senator Padilla, anything you'd like to add about prioritization of funds?
Yeah, all I would add, and I'm just going to leave the photo up that way. That looks much better than the real image anyway. So I think what I was trying to communicate prior to getting kicked off again was, again, the dollars that are coming into the state, you know, I'd like to see more than 90% actually reach the districts, but, you know, if it's 90%, I'd like to see 98% of that reach the actual classroom. If that means additional teachers and teacher recruitment, teacher preparation, ensuring that all that's done A to Z, so that the touch point, you know, with the actual student is occurring in smaller ratios. I think that's super important. And then the dollars that come into the state, you know, again, I was the sponsor of the legislation to create the Early Childhood Education and Care Department, and I'd like to see the vast majority of those dollars go to that department as well. If we're not focused on the first five years of life, really the first 36 months of life, which is where 82% of the synapses of the brain is formulated, then it's almost as though we're making a movie and we don't have the rights to the movie. You know, we invest in some years up to 54% of our state budget in public education, but if we're not preparing the raw material from the earliest opportunity, which really is early education, home visiting, we can't pretend that these things aren't happening in our state and don't exist in our state. We have to own up to them, take them seriously, and focus on that earliest opportunity to help the children succeed. So that's where I'd like to see the dollars go. I think that we had a great session this year to add more tools in the arsenal and the tool belt for public for the public education system. So I think that we will continue to do that year over year. But again, I also don't believe we should just throw dollars at something. I believe that we should put dollars in the right locations. I think I'm getting back audio. Anyway, so that would be my response. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, so let's go to the question that I alluded to shortly a few minutes ago. We know historically, and to be very clear, the Hispano Philanthropic Society focuses on the vibrancy of our Hispanic community, not just through philanthropy, but specifically through education. And so we've always been singularly focused on the progress of our Hispanic kids who, when we look at the data, we know have an opportunity gap that has resulted in a real gap in learning outcomes, whether we measure that by graduation rate, reading achievement, math achievement, science achievement, college going, college completion. How do we eliminate that gap? And most specifically, coming out of a year that was prolific for our education system and for our families, how are we going to use data to figure out where we need to invest the most and strongest interventions? Who came out of this pandemic ahead? Who's coming out further behind? What data do you think we might be able to use to really target this $1 billion, or that districts may be able to use to target these funds to make sure that the students and families that need them the most are in fact receiving them?
Well, since I think my colleagues here got a lot of time, I'm just going to jump in. You know how shy I am. Really what I'd like to see us do, and again, I apologize, Secretary Stewart, I think you were trying to jump in here, and I'll make this brief. I'm going to give one-word answers. Yes. What I really think we should consider doing is creating consistent reporting and analysis, because I can basically take any amount of data in my business. I'm a business owner. I've been for 21 years, a little over 21 years now. I was 6 when I started, and take that data and I can make it say really whatever I want it to say, you know. And so every time we have an administration come and go, we have or leadership and PED come and go. We just throw all the pieces in the air. We jerk the teachers around. We fool around with this and that or whatever, and we rejigger the whole thing, kind of like a business would do, to make their clients as happy as possible. You know, I'm a straight shooter. I just tell things the way I see it, and I really feel like we need to create a consistent way of looking, maybe say at the past 20 years, and then understand where we truly are. Because until we do that, we're going to understand really what direction are we going in. And so I think that's one critical element. Another one is as much as humanly possible, parental involvement or guardian involvement in the public education system is going to be critical. And I know that Secretary Stewart and his entire team have done a phenomenal job of crisscrossing the state, even in the pandemic, to learn as much as possible about, you know, their own roles. And I was just in I had 3 of the deputy secretaries that report to Secretary Stewart were in my district just about 2 weeks ago. Amanda, you were there for that groundbreaking for a charter school. You know, I'm a Democrat, but I fully support the charter school movement in New Mexico. It's a tough row to hoe if you're someone with my political label on it, but I just believe that as much opportunity for our children to succeed, and that includes charter schools, early education, all that is super important. But then layer over that, data sets that are consistent for a good period of time to truly understand what direction we're going in. Because if we just change the reporting around and change how we look at public education every 4 to 8 years, we're not doing any justice to anybody or service that way.
And thanks, Senator. And man, it's okay if I jump in, because the data question and the way in which we report the data question is one it's a big one for me. I know when I started at the public education department, I remember walking into one of our offices and looking and seeing, you remember the MS-DOS green screen where you had to enter like all of the word commands directly, and then you'd get this 1983 straight green screen that would enter it in. That was one of our data systems that we had for one of our critical elements, which for me was an immediate and visceral sign of the underinvestment that had historically taken place in having the right kinds of IT and data infrastructure to be able to have what Senator Padilla is talking about, which is a robust set of clear, consistent, usable reports that can be used by families to understand where their students are, that can be used by students to understand where they are, and that can be used by teachers to help plan instruction, and for the policymakers as well to be able to understand where we are as a system and where we need to make those investments. So we've invested, and we're continuing to do our build out on a number of different data infrastructure systems that will help both on the academic reporting side, on the business operations reporting side, and on all of the other data fields that PED is responsible for. But to focus specifically on the academic parts, the pandemic has really upended our assessment system and really challenged our ability to provide the kind of large-scale, valid, reliable assessments that federal and state law require and that the public depends on. So as we've been able to bring more students back into the building, it has allowed us to be able to administer some of the assessments that we've developed. We've had many of our students taking the SAT, which is a new prong in our assessment system, and one that we're really excited to have made that switch to, so that when kids take an assessment, they have currency to be able to take that to a higher education institution. We also we're going to be able to administer our 3 through 8 assessment, which we weren't able to administer last year because we've created the safety conditions to bring more students back. For those students who aren't coming back, we have a variety of options to be able to assess those students as well. Through some of our various formative assessment tools that can give us data on where they are as well. So in this pandemic year, we're going to have a set of data sources that look a little bit different than what they traditionally do, but represent both the practical aspect of being able to administer these assessments, get a view across the state as to where we've been, and also deal with some of the practical and psychometric limitations that you encounter when you have the kinds of conditions that the pandemic has brought on. And I'll be really brief in concluding here in that this is the first part in our assessment system, but we know that we can create an assessment system that even better captures the learning and the skills that the New Mexico graduate in 2022 all the way through 2050 and beyond are going to need to be able to do. And we've actually been engaged in an 18-month grant-funded project to really think about the future of our assessment system and how that looks even more robust and responsive to the multiple constituencies that we serve. So we're excited about that work as it goes into the future.
Representative Fajardo, anything to add on that topic?
No, I think Senator Padilla, the secretary, talked a lot about it. The question was what type of data that we need, and data is good, and I think it's imperative that we get the much needed data. We just need to make sure that we actually have a hands-on approach to how we move forward. The state of Mexico is really good at spending money in the state of New Mexico. We're really good about spending money in education, but what we're not really good at is results. And so we have an opportunity in our state. We have money coming in from the feds. We have CARES Act money. And so I'm really looking forward to actually seeing, it's that old adage, of a large ship, making a turn. It doesn't come easy, but this may be an eye opener for the state of New Mexico. So Gabe is great, love it, but let's make sure that we put our money actually behind it, so that those at the highest risk can actually get the help needed.
As we look to the 2021-2022 school year. So, all of our schools, most of them are back in person, as referenced by Secretary Stewart, at full capacity. I know I got to go to my niece's high school graduation. Well, I watched my niece's high school graduation online yesterday. But our parents are really about to start navigating the waters of what summer looks like this year, and trying to figure out what their student may need entering hopefully a more normal school year come this fall. And I know as legislators and policymakers, you're not oftentimes in the position of giving advice directly to parents. But I think there's a growing concern from parents of, I don't really know what my kid did or didn't learn. I haven't had those strong connections with my child's teacher in person the way that we might have in a normal year. How do I advocate for my child and what they might need? And specifically, even with some of this federal funding, whether that's tutoring, extended learning time, summer school. So do you have any ideas on how parents might be able to navigate this summer, things that they should be thinking about, asking about, engaging with their schools about prior to sending their child back to school this fall?
Well, one of the things that I learned very quickly coming to the legislature, I don't want to speak for Representative Fajardo, but I know that the school board is the most local form of politics that you can get your hands around. And the squeaky wheel does get the grease. That's not just an old, adage or whatever. That is true. I think that, those of us that work our butts off and run for the legislature and put ourselves through that grueling experience, it's because we're sort of like that. And we're going to go get things done for our towns and our communities and our neighborhoods and what have you. So when I reference the school board, I highly recommend that you get to know your school board member very, very well. I did that. My boys are 25 right now. They're twins. And I'm very proud of the work that they've done, but it took a lot of involvement in the school and in the schools that they attended. And the reason I say that is I would get together, I'd get a group of parents together, I'd get a group of people together, and I'd go down to see my school board member or my superintendent, if you have that relationship, my principal, and I would advocate for a longer school year. I know I'm going to be doing that in my area. I think it's incredibly important that we have a longer school year to help with the learning loss for this past year. I don't know, I'm not an educator, I'm a business person, I don't, but I do know kind of how to look at things and break them down and dissect them. And so what I'd like to see us do is just take a look at, what actual percent, what do we really think we lost over the past, 12 to 16 months, and see how we can pull that together from a longer school year standpoint. We talk about extended learning and before school, after school, and maybe some summer school. I think there's a lot of natural breaks there whenever that happens, and that's very valuable. That's very important. But I think that when you hold it all together in a longer period of time, then I think what that does is it extends what you're actually learning at that moment, rather than starting and stopping and losing something there, which is what we just experienced. So I would get together, with your local school and find out how to extend that school year. I think that's going to be incredibly important.
I have to agree with Senator Padilla. I'm really hoping we do have an extended school year coming up. I think the kids need it. As far as parent involvement, it's, I'm going to kind of jump off what Senator Padilla said and just add the fact that getting to know the principal and getting to know the schools. Like I said, my granddaughter is virtually learning right now. My daughter-in-law is a teacher. I mean, she turned her closet into a classroom in order to teach. And then she had a baby during this time, and had the baby, and it's crazy what people are going through. And so I'm glad my children are actually older. And the parents that have had to do double duty. We had millions of people leave the workforce because they can't do both. And so it's the parents that are involved are going to be able to be active and make changes, find out what's going on. But then I think it's the school's responsibility to reach out to those parents who aren't involved. And I think one thing that I think Senator Padilla said earlier is he wishes for more parental involvement, and we all want that, but you can't force it. And those are the kids that are falling through the cracks. Those are the kids that aren't getting the attention, and you can't force a parent to get involved. I've seen schools where they've actually done lotteries where if you show up for parent-teacher night, you can win a free TV, and they still don't show up. So it's going to be the school that's going to really have to take on that responsibility of making sure that those educational gaps are filled.
I think both of our legislators made reference to our extended school year programs, which we've invested in heavily. And so I won't reiterate some of what's been said there or the prompts to get involved locally. One thing I will say is, and I've had the ability to both travel to dozens of schools across the state during the pandemic, and then also host weekly teacher focus groups and student focus groups and family focus groups. And what I've heard very consistently from each of the different groups is that they actually feel that they've had more communication with the teacher to parent communication has increased during the pandemic, much more so than it was before. You had teachers who are consistently on email and working through their various chat rooms and so on. Teachers have literally been in people's homes in ways that they never have before. And so one of the challenges that we're going to have as we go forward is how do we build off of that increased communication and not lose that as we get back to a new normal. But as I say that to your question earlier, Amanda, about how can families know what their students have or haven't learned and advocate, there are many data sources that we have that don't require a single administration statewide standardized test to be able to get information on our kids. We've been doing them, and parents have been using them for a very long time. And now with some of the new communication tools that we have, we have the opportunity to increase the ability to have that exchange of where is my student, what is the specific area in which he or she really needs to focus their work. And so one thing I would say is leaning into the ways in which educators have posted whether it's their formative assessments or their teacher-made classroom assessments, oftentimes online, and made those more and more available to families to really look at those and have that ongoing conversation with your educator and with your student, really importantly, about which of these standards, which of these units were you very successful in, which ones did you really struggle in, or which ones did my child really struggle in, and use that as a baseline going forward. I think that the opportunity is certainly there. And I also think that as we go forward, it opens up the necessity to continue to track that with, again, some of the investments that we're making in our data systems, to be able to continue to track that and report that in an ongoing and accessible way for our families.
Our time on this panel is flying by, and I feel like I have 5 more questions I want to ask. So I will end with one, and I definitely want to also allow Senator Padilla time to just add any notes about broadband that he may have. Before I do that, I just want to say, Secretary Stewart, as we're talking about these extended learning opportunities, I want to give lots of credit to the legislature for prioritizing funding of both K-5+ and the extended learning time initiative in the statewide budget in a way where other states are having to use their federal funds to do that. We already have it through the state funding formula, so we can use our federal funds for additional interventions. So kudos to our legislature for funding that and the executive for getting it through. And we look forward to PED reporting on how many schools may be participating in those programs after this budget cycle that we're in the middle of. My question, Senator Stewart, to close on before we go to Senator Padilla for one last comment about broadband is, I know the state has to get a plan to USAID about how we can monitor these funds and how districts will be required to talk about their plans for these funds. Do you know what that process might look like, or how everyone on this call wanting to be good community partners and engage in those conversations with our local districts? Are there any timelines that we might be aware of, or processes that would be good to flag for us so that we can be engaged community partners in those conversations?
Great question. And so I'll talk first about the 90% of funds that go directly out to the districts. Again, those are very locally controlled. We have established some priorities at the state, like I said earlier, but the ultimate decision gets made locally. And so I highly encourage you to be working with your local board and with your local equity council to really think about how those funds get used and distributed equitably across the system, and be heavily involved in that decision-making process at the local level. And there is a requirement for schools and districts to be engaging in these community meetings and tribal consultation when it comes to the use of those locally designated funds. When it comes to the use of the smaller percentage of the funds that are available at the state level, we just wrapped up a series of hosting of regional meetings around the state. So we did have hundreds of participants who are participating in our regional meetings and gave feedback on the funding and what their biggest funding needs are. We have weekly meetings with our superintendents and charter leaders. And then also smaller groups with them where we're talking to them about various programs that they're either running or we're considering running or supporting, and how we can make those available. And then we've had a number of feedback and stakeholder sessions with various groups, whether it's our New Mexico Out of School Time Network or our Special Education Working Group or others. And as we continue to go forward, we're working through our outreach team to plan even more outreach events in various stakeholder areas to get more feedback on what you're seeing, what the needs are, and how we can best make strategic use of those funds, from our advisory councils to the Secretary's Advisory, which we have coming up on Saturday, and other venues. And finally, we're always open to trying to create more venues if there are ways that we haven't been able to reach you or other constituencies through some of those efforts. So either reaching out to myself or our leadership team directly for you or your organization, if you have thoughts, we're always willing to identify ways to connect with you directly.
Okay, thanks, Secretary Stewart. Senator Padilla, before we go to audience Q&A, and audience, that's a good opportunity to add any questions. Those that you submitted prior to, we tried to incorporate into the program, but if you have another question, drop it in the chat and I will try and get to it. But Senator Padilla, I know you had some technology issues at the beginning, but kudos to you for all of your work around broadband. Anything that we should be looking out for, anything that we could do to support the expansion of broadband in the years ahead?
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you. Great job today, Amanda, for keeping us all online here and on track. Thank you to Secretary Stewart and all the folks in the administration, and they're just doing so much difficult work and keeping it all together. So thank you, Mr. Secretary, and to your team. And my colleague, Representative Fajardo. I mean, everybody in the legislature is just having so much fun, as you can imagine, with this entire whole thing. What was supposed to be a 60-day affair wound up being a 75-day affair, and here we are still, a month later, 2 months later, trying to figure it all out. On broadband, we made a significant move forward for New Mexico. States that have put broadband offices in statute, I think we're the 17th state now, have seen just tremendous growth and tremendous expansion and access, in a very short period of time. We're going to have the governance that we need in order to not just receive this money, but utilize it in the most efficient and best way possible. The office is going to have 6 critical functions. One is we're actually going to have a broadband plan that links up with federal standards through the FCC, USDA, and other organizations. We're going to have a financial plan so that we know where it is, where it isn't, and what's going to cost and this and that. We have more cows than people in some of our byways here in New Mexico. And so I think that's why it's so expensive to bring it out to New Mexico. You heard some fantastic news from the governor. We have multiple organizations that we're working with and companies, several of them right here in New Mexico that are going to help us to do that. The office is also going to have the responsibility of rights of way and easement repository and access. So I think that's going to be really very well taken. Reporting and analysis to the people of New Mexico, the legislature, the governor, and all the critical elements of how to get this done. We're going to have an individual that's going to take every dollar that we invest in New Mexico to leverage it across other funding sources, which is going to help us to maximize the dollars that we need. We're also going to have, and probably the most critical function, I had some really big broadband legislation in 2017. I put broadband in the Local Infrastructure Act that year. We reformed the USF fund and what those dollars are used for. And I was able to rewrite all of New Mexico, the New Mexico Telecommunications Act, which hadn't been modernized since before the internet came along, surprisingly. Big surprise there. But what the most critical element is to take all of that and have this group of specialists that can work with local political subdivisions, villages, cities, towns, counties, you name it, and be able to put their plans together, link them all the way up to the state plan, which will link to the federal plan, and then we know where it is, where it isn't, and all that. We have 22%, over 1 out of every 5 of our neighbors has no broadband whatsoever. And the 78% that do have it, it's woefully under speed and this and that. So I see great things happening in a very short period of time. Right now, they're in the selection process, separation of powers. The administration is right now in the process of selecting a first director for that office. I was very heavily involved once we got the secretary for the Early Childhood Education and Care Department after I were able to get that done. So as you know how shy I am, as I mentioned, I will ride that person around until everybody in New Mexico has the highest speed broadband possible on the face of the planet. So I think we're in very good shape there, Amanda. Thank you. Thanks for letting me say a few words about broadband.
You're welcome. Thank you for your work, Senator. I think we are going to be hard pressed to get all of these questions coming through in the chat answered, but I will try and prioritize. Maybe one question is, let's do some level setting of expectations. We all know our education ranking is very near the bottom, if not consistently at the bottom. Do we think that might change? Do we think that with community support and this money coming in, let's level set? What do you think might be possible in the next few years in terms of that national education ranking? And what can we expect and how can we help?
Well, I'll just jump in and say that the short answer is absolutely. That's why we're investing in our kids, and through the investments that we're making in our kids and putting together the right kinds of programs, our extended year programs, our career pathways, our CTE work, the work that we're doing in early literacy and structured literacy, the additional professional development that we're offering, and the whole package of investments that we're making. Absolutely, you should expect and demand that our rankings grow. And I get a little bit, I don't know what the word I want to look for here is. I don't know if it's passionate. I don't know if it's excited, defensive, what have you. When I think about the great work that we've got going, the great educators that we have, and the way in which some of these rankings kind of boil it down in ways I don't know that fully captures what the things that we do and the things that our educators do here in New Mexico. I think we've certainly got some of the best educators anywhere in many of our schools, but clearly and the governor said this very, very well, we've got a ton of work to do. There is no reason why we can't get every single one of our students to be in a career and college pathway that excites them and gets them all the way through college and into the post-secondary system of their choice. And that's our charge. We have to do that. And there's no reason why every single second, third, fourth grader in our state shouldn't be an engaged, passionate reader. We know how that this works, and we can do that. Nothing about it is easy, and it takes the ongoing, sustained commitment to doing it, but we should absolutely demand that of ourselves.
I'm to say I'm the internal optimist. Yeah, it's no secret we're last in education. I have a colleague in Mississippi, and it's always a joke. Well, at least there's Mississippi, they're 50th, and they're making some huge strides in education. And he's like, yeah, not for long. And that scares me. Who wants to be? We've always had that. But I am the internal optimist, and this may be what we need to do to shake us up. If this isn't it, we're in trouble as a state. So let's hope that we actually put our money where our mouth is, that the money coming in goes to the classroom, not fancy buildings, not administration, but let's make sure kids are being educated, that we're hiring more tutors than we are chairs. I drive around Albuquerque and I see these buildings, and that's money not going to the classroom. And so we need to make sure that the money coming in is prioritized for these kids.
Yes.
There's
I don't want to get kicked off again. I agree with everything that the two previous speakers said.
wonderful. We do have 2 more minutes before we need to start closing. So Secretary Stewart, there was a question in the chat that I think you can see about just investments on the health side of the educational system. So school nurses, staffing up so that maybe we can do more vaccines within the school building, things like that. Any issues or priorities, I guess I should say, from the public education department to really bolster our school nurses in the works?
Well, specifically responding to COVID, we are working directly with DOH to get more vaccination events and more testing events out to school sites and making those widely available. We've been doing that throughout the pandemic. We'll continue to do that work as the number of children eligible for the vaccine expands. With regard to the longer term, we're working with the Human Services Department to beef up the amount of Medicaid service billing that we're able to offer, so that we're able to significantly expand the amount of behavioral health services and other Medicaid billable services that we're able to offer to students throughout the state. And that will be a major influx of health resources, and I think a real game changer for our state when that's finished.
Thank you, Secretary. I would just like to take a moment to thank Secretary Stewart, Representative Fajardo, and Senator Padilla for taking time out of their very busy schedules to speak with us today. And before I turn it over to our Vice Chair for closing remarks, I just want to say, I hope everyone on this call will take what we've heard today and be unabashed about advocating for our students in the months and years ahead. I want to jump on to Representative Fajardo's comments and say, I do think this could be a moment where we really change the tide in New Mexico, but it's going to take all of us. So our ask from HPS that our co-chair will follow up with shortly is join us, help us advocate, use your voice, and make sure that we're always putting students at the center of these conversations. And my apologies, I misread my direction. So I'm actually going to hand it back to Gabe, our chair, to close today. Thank you all again.
Amanda, thank you for your service today, moderating the discussion. Amazing work as always. Thank you again to our Secretary of Education, Dr. Ryan Stewart. Representative Kelly Fajardo, it's so great to see you again. And thank you so much for returning and helping support this event. And Senator Padilla, it's so great to see you again. I got to work with you this year in collaboration with Leadership Albuquerque and the greater Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce work, trying to support advocacy around one of your bills, and just always appreciate your passion around these efforts. I want to applaud you for your continued dedication, your hard work this legislative session and this year, and for being willing to so nimbly navigate through some of the connectivity issues that were highlighted today. Again, special thank you once again to our governor, Michelle Lujan-Grisham, for joining us and serving as our keynote speaker. And to all our attendees today, here's our ask to you. Please take a moment to like United Way of Central New Mexico on Facebook. Visit our new website and continue to engage in the work being done in our communities for our communities. Reach out to Stephanie Jaramillo Kazemchek, manager of the Hispano Philanthropic Society. We need more Hispanic leaders to step up and learn how we can support our Hispanic community. Philanthropy is writing a check or volunteering. There are ways for everyone to connect to this work. I noted on Facebook that Alice Smith added our new donations portal tool, Harness, in the Facebook thread. It makes it easy to support our work, whether you're self-employed, your employer doesn't offer an employee giving campaign, or you choose to give through this tool. So on behalf of our entire HPS Council and the United Way of Central New Mexico, thank you all and continue to be safe. And to echo our governor, please get vaccinated if you haven't already. We are planning an in-person event later this year, and we'd love to see all of you join us for that. Once again, muchas gracias y que su senda sea bendecida. Have a wonderful day.